Embassy of the Dead, Chapter 9. This is really happening. Jake could feel his heart racing. The headlights of Pickle the camper van punctured the night, illuminating the thick hedgerows as they rushed into view before disappearing into the darkness behind. Jake had no idea how long he'd been driving for, but the events of the last few hours were all starting to feel rather unreal. He glanced across at the angry-looking ghost glowering at him from the passenger seat. If it wasn't for the indisputable fact that Jake felt more awake than he'd ever been, he might have believed he was dreaming. The Bone Wolf were most definitely the stuff of nightmares. And that figure on the hillside. Still, at least he was alive, and this time he wasn't taking it for granted. Jake took a deep breath, composed himself, then remembered he was currently in a stolen camper van fleeing a pack of murderous animal corpses controlled by an all-powerful hooded deathbringer. "I don't want to die!" he suddenly shrieked. "It's not fair! I'm only 12! How has this happened?" Perhaps staying calm was too much to ask just now. Stiffkey sighed and gave Jack a reluctantly apologetic look. "I suppose you deserve some sort of explanation." "Well, yes, that would be nice if it's not too much trouble," said Jake sarcastically. "All right, boy, but I'd be reminding you to respect your elders, and they don't come much more elder than I," said Stiffkey. He took a deep breath. "The box you stole?" "I did not steal it. You gave it to me." "Well, if you hadn't said your name was Good Morning, neither of us would be—" "All right, it doesn't matter now. Just please tell me what on earth's going on." Stiffkey sighed and started again. "The box you have in your rucksack was a spectral container. Its contents can be carried by ghosts or the living, on and off the earthly plane, and when you opened it, you invited a whole heap of trouble upon yourself, because that particular box was never meant to be opened, especially not by an unlicensed member of the living who shouldn't know anything about it. So now the embassy have sent Mawkins to find you, reclaim the box, and banish you to the eternal void." Stiffkey paused and drummed his long grey fingers on the dashboard. "And now I've broken the embassy rules by helping you, which means Mawkins will be coming for me too. Yep, we're in it together now, make no mistake." Jake glanced across at the grumpy old ghost. He had to admit it was nice of him to come back and help him. If he hadn't, Jake would have been toast already. "So who is Mawkins?" "Mawkins is one of the 12 Reapers, and the embassy don't summon him often. They say he can track a man from one side of the earth to the next in the time it takes for the sun to rise and set, once he's got the scent. And now you've opened the box, he's got it all right. And each time you open it, you'll get the scent stronger, and it'll be on you even faster. So you remember that next time you're feeling curious." Jake couldn't help but feel a bit sheepish at that. If only he'd never looked in the box, none of this would be happening. But it was too late for regrets. Stiffkey stared straight ahead. "He ain't like you or I. He don't talk, he don't smile, and he ain't ever been alive. So it means nothing to him to send a child to the void." Jake shuddered. Mawkins did not sound like the sort of person you wanted chasing you across the countryside on a dark night. He shook his head in disbelief. "This is really happening, isn't it?" Stiffkey nodded slowly and glanced across at him. "That's the long and short of it." Jake sighed. "Okay, so what is the Embassy of the Dead? What does it do?" "The embassy was created to police the divide between the worlds of the living and the dead. It stands at one of the points where the earthly plane and the afterworld are closest, and its rules and regulations are meant to protect both the living from any unauthorised uses of power against them by the dead, as well as protect the dead from any unwholesome spirits passing over into the afterworld," he explained. "I worked for the embassy for a long while, but then—" Stiffkey turned towards the window a moment, as if lost in a memory, then turned back and brushed some dirt off his shoulder.
Anyway, I decided to retire, but as one of the most trusted members of the embassy," he straightened in his seat, "they had one last request to ask of me, to hide and protect the box you now carry until such a time as it were summoned back."
Stiffkey paused.
"Then, a few days ago, I was contacted and asked to take the box to a specific earthly time and place and hand it over to an agent known as Good Morning, after which I could return to my retirement. It was all top secret, and it would have worked perfectly if only you hadn't answered to Good Morning and been able to see me, and then accepted the box like you were expecting it, and then gone and opened the thing and had a little look. Goodness knows what Good Morning must have thought when he turned up and I didn't, not to mention what the embassy must now think of me. A near perfect record I had."
Stiffkey glared at Jake.
"I might be retired, but my instincts are still sharp, boy, and I knew something weren't quite right with you."
He pointed at Jake and narrowed his eyes.
"So I followed you home and waited outside, then followed you to the farm. I didn't know who you were, but I knew you weren't Good Morning, and I knew you had no idea what was in that box. And when I noticed my pocket watch was fast, I realised it were all a big mistake. And now we're being hunted by Morcans, and both of us will get thrown into the eternal void, sure as geese lay eggs."
Stiffkey rubbed his temple and breathed in deeply.
"It's a right old mess you've gotten us into, that's for sure."
Jake grimaced. He was pretty sure it wasn't totally his fault, but it didn't feel like the right time to mention it. If living through the mum and dad situation had taught him anything, it was the power of a sudden subject change to diffuse an awkward confrontation.
"Those bone wolves, huh? They were horrible. I can't believe we're not dead." "Speak for yourself, boy," said Stiffkey, smiling to himself. "I died a long while back."
He nodded at a signpost, a flash of white in the grey-green night, with a place name written on it, Worstings.
"And that be our turn."
Jake relaxed slightly as he signalled right. At least Stiffkey didn't seem quite as angry any more. "And what will we find when we get to Worstings?" asked Jake, with a hopeful side glance at his ghostly companion.
Stiffkey's face darkened, the brief smile vanishing. "We'll cross that bridge when we come to it."
Jake looked across at him nervously. "What do you mean?"
"Let's just say it were a misunderstanding. Another one. And the person involved ain't the sort to forgive and forget."
He looked out the window. It was clear the conversation was over. Jake shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He'd already driven further than he'd ever driven before and was getting tired. There might be motorways to contend with, and what if someone noticed a child driving a stolen van? Though technically he hadn't really stolen it, he just borrowed it. Knowing Dad, he probably wouldn't even notice it was gone. Jake looked at Stiffkey. The ghost had picked up the phone and was turning it around in his long, thin fingers, examining it suspiciously. "How come you can touch things?" said Jake. "Shouldn't your hands just slip through stuff?" Once again Stiffkey's mood seemed to brighten. Like Jake had touched upon a favourite subject.
"You be having a common misconception about us ghosts, so let me educate you some. Firstly, the word ghost is actually what they call a blanket term."
He stopped as Jake giggled.
"What's funny?" "Well, you know, blankets. Like when you put a blanket on your head to pretend to be a ghost," he explained.
Stiffkey frowned down at Jake, his whiskery grey eyebrows furrowing in disapproval.
"I find that quite offensive."
"Sorry, Stiffkey," said Jake. It was obvious that Stiffkey took offence quite easily. He'd have to tread carefully. Thank goodness Sab's not here, he thought. Stiffkey cleared his throat.
"As I was saying, ghost is a blanket term used to describe all spirits trapped on the earthly plane."
He scratched the transparent tip of his nose with the transparent tip of his finger.
"I be a spectre, and a special sort of spectre at that. but there's plenty more different types besides. The wraiths, the wights, the poltergeists, to name but a few. Anyway, the only thing we ghosts all have in common is that we were once in living bodies, but now the body is dead and gone, and somehow, for some reason or other, what you might call your spirit be staying here on the earthly plane.
Jake nodded. Okay, that makes sense, he said. Actually, he wasn't sure it did make sense, but then lots of the things he understood to be true he didn't really understand, especially science stuff. Like, how did electricity work? It had begun to rain, so Jake reached across and switched on the indicators, then squirted the windscreen with more water, then finally found the windscreen wipers. Stiffkey raised an eyebrow, but didn't comment, for which Jake was grateful. Sab would definitely have called him an idiot. Hanging out with more mature friends had its advantages. Stiffkey continued.
Aye, there are many different types of ghost. They can range from anything between invisible and visible, or both. For example...
He faded slightly. Jake blinked. Very impressive.
They can also have a physical presence.
Stiffkey rapped his knuckles against the dashboard.
Or none.
He rapped his knuckles again, and this time they passed through the wood.
It's rare a ghost can do both and switch between them at will. It's just us spectres that can, he smiled proudly, and apparently there ain't many spectres that can do it as well as me. It's why I was recruited by the embassy. I can carry things and I can drift through things, both of which make you an excellent ghost to carry out embassy business.
He frowned and looked out the window.
Little good it's done me now, though.
Jake nodded slowly. So what makes some ghosts different to others? I mean, what is it that gives you those superpowers? Stiffkey chuckled to himself rather dryly.
Superpowers, he says. He turned to look at Jake. You ask a lot of questions, boy, and to be honest, a ghost tires of talking about the mechanics of haunting. I'll tell you this, though, and let it be an end to your bothering. There be some ghosts who have more energies than others, which means they have more ghostly superpowers, as you say, and I've got a lot of energies. It's a curse and a blessing. It means I've got a solid form and can touch and feel, and it means I can be seen or not, depending on what I choose. But the problem with having lots of energies is it means I won't be moving on until it all runs out. The more energies, the longer the haunting.
Moving on where? Asked Jake. Stiffkey gazed out of the window.
To the afterworld.
And is that what you want?
Stiffkey nodded. That's what all ghosts want. When we're waiting to move on, we get the longings. He sighed. It's like there's a thread from your heart all the way to the afterworld, and all those that you loved that died and didn't get stuck are tugging on it, trying to get you where you belong, with them.
He took his hat off and brushed some fresh soil from it before holding it in his lap.
I just want to get on with the rest of my death and be dying happily ever after, so's to say.
Stiffkey gave a sad smile and fell silent for a few seconds before continuing.
But I'm stuck here on the earthly plane all on my own till all my energies run out, and they're fading so slowly. I've got another 200 years or thereabouts. That's what the embassy reckons.
Jake couldn't imagine waiting for anything 200 years. It was bad enough when his dad was 5 minutes late to pick him up on a Saturday. He felt bad for Stiffkey. And maybe the embassy got it wrong. You might move on next week, who knows? Stiffkey almost smiled.
That's wishful thinking, boy. The only way I'll move on faster is if I get undone, but I'm a lost cause, and none of this will matter if Mawkins catches up with us and sends us to the eternal void.
Stiffkey shuddered. What do you mean, get undone? Asked Jake. This time he was determined to get an answer. The van swerved slightly, and Jake quickly corrected the steering wheel. Stiffkey shot him a disapproving look.
That's something you'll find out when we get to Worstings, no doubt. So you best concentrate on getting us there for now, boy.
He took a deep breath and drew his hands down his face. making it sag even more than usual.
Sure, Bad Penny's going to have plenty to say on that subject.
Well, my goodness, that was a long chapter, wasn't it? But
Yes, it was 15 minutes.
oh, and what does it tell us?
It tells us, well, it teaches us about the types of ghosts, and it teaches us that Jake is quite a good driver because
Because he hasn't crashed yet.
well, he's just driving and talking with Stiffkey, which
Isn't really very credible for a 12-year-old driving at night, is it?
yes,
Yeah. Okay, that's not. But it's interesting. It's kind of like, we had that chapter that introduced us to Mum and Dad and Jake's mum and dad situation. So it told us all about Jake as a character. And now we've had another chapter that's kind of telling us all about Stiffkey as a character. And it's telling us a bit about the Embassy of the Dead and the difference between the afterworld and the earthly plane and stuff like that, and ghosts.
but it's also using dialogue and exercising our brains.
Yep, that's true.